Prayers for the nation's 35th president, and Mayor Mike Rawlings spoke.
We all grew up that day, city and citizens, and suddenly we had to step up to trying to live up to the challenges of the words and visions of a beloved president.
After the mayor spoke, those in the crowd bowed their heads for a moment of silence. NBC's Janet Shamlian is in Dallas for us live right now. And Janet, this is the first time that Texas, Dallas, has held a ceremony of this magnitude. We're going to talk much more about that, but it is striking 50 years later to see these people there and on a chilly day marking this moment.
Yeah, you're right about the weather, too. The mood was kind of reflective of what we're seeing here. 35 degrees. It feels more like Duluth, Minnesota than Dallas. And rainy and overcast. And as you noted, really the first time that this city has paid homage to what happened here, to remember, and to remember in a reflective way. I will tell you that the weather changed the ceremony considerably. We did not see a performance by the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and the event did not close with the Air Force missing man flyover formation, but nonetheless the ceremony went on. You saw people in ponchos, some 5,000 gathered here. We heard remarks by the Dallas mayor, and as you just said, that moment of silence and the bells tolling all throughout this city. Also comments by author David McCullough reciting some of the moments of President Kennedy's various well-known remarks. People kind of dispersing right now. As I said, it's 35 degrees out here, very cold, but the ceremony broadcast in many places. Here it was just very quiet, reverential, about 45 minutes in length. And again, the first time that Dallas has really embraced this or taken some measures in half a century to remember in this way, Tamron, what happened here, to memorialize it, to commemorate it, and to remember that it's such a big part of this history of this city.
Of course, it's my home city, and at any given time in that area, Janet, you have tourists from all over the world recreating the steps, looking at the depository, going behind the fence to try to understand what happened there. And literally every day there are people there selling their own leaflets, some focused on conspiracy, others focused on the headlines from papers that day. So there's always activity there, but obviously today it is very different and far more grand in what we present it to the world to see.
And so respectful, and the music and the tone, and even people who didn't have tickets to get in braved this weather and stood on the perimeter, which was quite a devotion considering the weather here today, Tamron.
All right, Janet, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And another ceremony is being held right now at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston. We'll be bringing the portion of that to you live as well. Meantime, other ceremonies today included one at President Kennedy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, attended by members of the Kennedy family, including the president's only surviving sibling, 85-year-old sister Jean Kennedy Smith. Meantime, flags are being flown at half-staff on all government buildings nationwide today on orders from President Obama. And just a half hour ago, President Obama paid tribute to President John F. Kennedy by holding an event with an institution created by JFK, of course, the Peace Corps. President Obama participated in a video conference with Peace Corps volunteers in Tanzania. Mr. Obama also declared today a day of remembrance for JFK's honor. Let me bring in our special News Nation panel today. NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss, who joins me here in studio, and joining us from Dallas, presidential historian Larry Sabato. He's author, of course, of the Kennedy Half Century. He's also with us is Reed Epstein, national political reporter for Politico. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Obviously, when you look at these pictures and these images coming in, Michael, I'll start with you here. Being a Texan, as I explained to you my entire life, you go through this area and you realize that Dallas struggled with how to remember what happened. And these are images of Boston right now, but Dallas greatly struggled on how to accept what happened on its doorstep.
Even the Dallas Cowboys, which had been scheduled to play a game that weekend, which they actually did, not only were they worried about the fact that people would be angry at them or perhaps angry at them playing, they were even worried that violence would be done on them on the field by people who were angry at Dallas. And you know, the other irony, Tamron, you were just showing that image from the Kennedy Library. Dallas has wanted to get away from, you know, talking about the assassination. So has the Kennedy Librarian Jacqueline Kennedy. She wanted him to be remembered for his life. So this is a change in both cases.
And let's look at the timeline of where we are. Larry, let me bring you in. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, Parkland Hospital, the president was pronounced dead around 2:12, not very far from this timeline here. Rifle shells were found on the 6th floor of the depository, and then 2:15, Officer Tippett, whose wife just spoke with Tom Brokaw, was shot and killed in Oak Cliff, Texas, as we call it if you're from Texas, a section of Dallas there. So these events were unraveling, but one of the things I think is incredible is that stretch of space where President Kennedy was shot. There weren't cameras, there weren't reporters there. They were all 5 minutes away at the Dallas Mart, which is where the big event was supposed to happen.
Yes, it's quite a change from what it would be today when everybody would have a camera, a personal cell phone taking all kinds of pictures and video. We're eternally grateful to Abraham Zapruder and also to Orville Nix for their films of the actual assassination. We'd be in deep trouble if we didn't have that kind of evidence. But, you know, I'm here. I can tell you it's a solemn day in Dallas. Most people are being very respectful. I thought it was a wonderful ceremony that was very appropriate to the moment.
Right.
And as Michael Beschloss mentioned earlier, it was held right in front, not just, we don't like to call it the Texas School Book Depository building anymore. That's the 6th floor museum.
Yes, the 6th floor museum.
And Michael was correct. They do a wonderful job. People who visit Dallas should absolutely go to that museum.
We, as a kid, would take our school field trips there as well. It has grown. But for a second, I'd like to pause and take our audience to Boston, where Governor Deval Patrick right now is reading of the now the trumpet speech, of course, the inaugural address given by Kennedy on January 20th, 1961. Let's listen in.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
And of course, the great James Taylor Reid. Let me bring you in again. The climate at the time, we know, again, talking about the legacy, but the conditions in Texas, some at the time, and they even believe now, were ripe for problems, but nothing to the degree that anyone expected the assassination of this president. In fact, we've looked at much of the video of the young girls in Fort Worth, Texas, who were there waiting to greet this charismatic couple and saying, hey, I may not vote for him, but I wanted to be near and see. And they understood this power that this couple, not just an individual, but of course he stands alone, but together they were formidable.
It's right. You know, presidents from Kennedy up until today sort of come with an aura and a presence that you see people, even today when President Obama travels in places that are not necessarily politically hospitable to him, you see the same type of outreach. You see people lining the streets as the motorcade comes by, and the same sort of thing was happening back then in Dallas. Even though Kennedy was warned not to come, and there's some letters that you look at them now, they're quite ominous, where you see that people urging him not to visit Dallas.
There were wanted posters with his image on it that had been circulated, flyers around.
But people still come out to see the President of the United States because for many of these people, it might be the only time in their lives that they can see a president in person.
Absolutely. Michael, speak to that. 150 to 200,000 people, a third of the population at that time, had come to see the president. We didn't have Facebook, Twitter. You couldn't log on, all of these obvious things that people know. So to Reid's point, for Texas, despite the politics, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
It meant a lot. And of course, as that car turned into Dealey Plaza plaza. The last words John Kennedy ever heard were from Nellie Connolly, who was sitting in the seat in front, who said, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you now."
Right.
And I think he could not have disagreed with that. But the worry was real because in 1960, just before the 60 election, Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson had been jostled in the Adolphus Hotel by people who were conservatives who thought that he
As they were walking across the street, right?
Absolutely, and it actually generated a lot of good feeling toward the Johnson-Kennedy ticket. Bobby Kennedy thought that that elected John Kennedy in Texas, and oddly enough, perhaps in the country. Plus, a shot taken at General Edwin Walker, which we now know was by Lee Oswald. People didn't know it then. And also Adlai Stevenson, by then the UN ambassador, was attacked in Dallas about a month before the assassination. So these were not unreal fears.
Absolutely. And Larry, you know, I was speaking with someone earlier today, and I said my mother, I was a school kid in South Texas, Luling, Texas, still attending a segregated school, the black school as it was called back then. And she told me last night, I think for the first time, that they called all of the black children into the gym and told them that Kennedy had been killed. All of the children burst into tears. Their parents soon to pick them up from school, but here was this kid, you know, in South Texas in a segregated school, and we knew, and the world knew, that this was not the story of Catholic pain or Irish pain. This was American pain experience.
I was in the 6th grade in a Catholic elementary school in Norfolk, Virginia, and I've never to this day seen so many adults and children crying all at once. It was absolutely horrible.
To leave behind a record of what the people on the street felt.
Right, what you saw, what you felt that day, and we thank you so much for again rejoining me today to share with me and all of us what you saw then and what you saw today. Tony Glover in Dallas. Tony, thank you.
Thanks.
It is hard to even fathom. A president dead, a vice president getting hastily sworn in. You may know what happened in Dallas 50 years ago, but you may be surprised to see what took place on Air Force One in the hours after the death of JFK. Years ago, after the shooting, President Kennedy's body was taken to Air Force One, and our Martin Savage takes a look at what exactly happened inside this cramped and overheated space on one of the darkest days in our nation's history.
The peaceful transition of power for the mightiest nation on earth took place not in the White House or even in Washington, but on a plane. The window shades drawn for fear of snipers, the air conditioning off to save fuel. The scratchy audio captured on a dictation machine. Built the year before, President Kennedy's Air Force One was the first presidential jet. Jackie Kennedy hired the designer who came up with its distinctive paint scheme, still used today. That day in Dallas, as the first couple set off into the adoring crowd, the crew monitored their progress on the plane's radios. It wasn't long before they knew something was terribly wrong.
This is the situation room. I read you.
The president had been shot.
We have report quoting Mr. Kilduff in Dallas that the president is dead.
In an instant, Air Force One transformed into a command center, and as far as anyone knew, was the only safe place for a possibly still targeted vice president.
Do you have any passengers on board? Roger, full load, 40 plus.
But to the frustration of many, Lyndon Johnson, codenamed Volunteer, refused to take off until he took the oath of office.
We are waiting for Judge Volunteer for swearing in. That is for Volunteer, is that right? Yes, we are having one, getting one here to have it done before we take off, right?
Meanwhile, determined the president's body should not travel in the baggage compartment, the crews struggled to make space in the plane. Historian Jeff Underwood recalls what had to be done.
So they pulled these 4 seats out. Then they took a saw and they cut off the bulkhead right across here. The line is still there.
The president's casket was rushed up the plane's stairs, while up forward, people pressed into the sweltering space to bear witness.
And then the photographer was cramped up on the little couch that's right here in the corner and push themselves up into the corner.
Jackie Kennedy insisted on being present. The photographer careful to frame the shot so not to show the blood of her husband on her clothes. Finally, it was time to go.
Can you tell me in regards to 1 and 2 or the top people? Roger, the president is on board, the body is on board, and Mayor County is on board.
With that, Air Force One took off, signaling its departure in long-standing Secret Service code that on this terrible day seemed so fitting. Angel is airborne. Martin Savage, CNN.
And don't forget to watch The Assassination of President Kennedy. It is a film by Tom Hanks, and you can see it here on CNN tonight, 10 o'clock Eastern.
Residents, as many as a third of them turned out to see President Kennedy and Jackie make the sunny drive from Love Field through downtown Dallas, until the sound of rifle shots shattered everything, including the image of Dallas.
But Dallas was branded as a city of shame and a city of hate and all these ridiculous terms that didn't really apply to most people. And Dallas residents resented it.
Lee Harvey Oswald was not from Dallas or of Dallas, but the perception proved hard to shake.
It's just been decades of continuous reminders that, oh, this is the city that killed presidents. No, it's not. One guy did.
Time moves on. You know, people began to not blame the city, but to blame the right person. And especially after the Warren Commission report, to blame other things.
Dallas Mayor Michael Rawlings.
When people think today about Dallas, they think about business and what we do down here.
It's also become the Mecca for the curious and the sentimental.
It's amazing to see the history.
And continues to fascinate to the extreme, with some running into the street to stand on the spot where the president was assassinated.
Most recognize the downtown Dallas skyline as an image of success and glamour. But for some, it will never obscure the dark day in Dealey Plaza.
Do you think of JFK? Yes, I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Always.
Always.
I'm not sure we want to ever escape history. It's good to own history. It's something that you talk to your kids about.
Alex Witt, NBC News, Dallas.
Joining me now, Wayne Slater, senior political writer for the Dallas Morning News. Wayne, thanks so much for joining us. We are approaching 2:22 Eastern time, and this is when the rifle was discovered on the 6th floor of the depository. The investigation, obviously, at this point, in full swing, but also great attention at Parkland Hospital, as we know. And very soon, LBJ would leave Parkland for Air Force One to return to D.C. But in Dallas, you've been covering politics for 20 years. How would you describe the climate there? Even, you know, here we are, a solid red state still, perhaps purple one day, some would say. But nevertheless, how would you categorize Dallas's legacy with the events today?
Well, you know, it's been a long, long haul for Dallas, whereas everybody else in the country responded when they heard the news with grief and shock. In Dallas, it was grief and shame, and it's 50 years of the process of moving from denial and shame to acceptance and trying to embrace the idea of history. And part of that was what you just talked about. There are everywhere in Dallas these tangible reminders. The school book depository right there, the Texas Theater where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured, Parkland Hospital, you drive by that, although it's a bigger idea. Marina Oswald, the widow of Lee Harvey Oswald, is a 72-year-old grandmother living in suburban Dallas. Now, everywhere around us are remembrances of this, but I think the process of healing and Dallas accepting what happened and not simply wanting to deny what happened, but make it and embrace it as part of the history has been a long process, but it's clearly underway.
I remember in the 90s when I moved to Philadelphia, I went to Temple University and I was at a gas station. Someone asked me where I was from and I said Dallas. And it was an older gas station attendant and he said with a smirk, "Oh, so you're from where you killed the president?" And I'd never heard anyone say that to me. And here I was, 19, 18 years old. And that was my first exposure, really, to how the rest of the world saw us.
Yeah, and you know, I think part of this, at one point, there were a group of people in Dallas who wanted to level the school book depository, the museum now, and in fact, cooler heads prevailed, and they said, no, we're not going to erase our history, we're going to embrace this history, a memorial, the school book depository, and accept what's happened here. I think that Dallas has lived for years, as we all know, under a psychological shadow. That shadow is not gone yet. You heard the mayor today, Mayor Rollins, make a reference to Dallas. We're not the same city. That was a defense of Dallas even today.
And for